Hello, everyone, and welcome to Career Conversations. I am very excited today to be joined by Maureen Mahle, Managing Director of Sustainable Building Services at Stephen Winter Associates, a leading research and consulting firm specializing in energy efficient, sustainable, and accessible buildings. We will begin our conversation, Maureen, here shortly. Before we do, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about our organization, Build Green CT. Our mission, accelerate the just and sustainable transformation of the built environment in Connecticut through education, advocacy, and community building. We encourage everyone viewing this to become a member. As an emerging professional, you get a discounted annual membership for $45, or if you're a student, it's even more discounted at $25. This membership gets you access to complimentary or discounted admission to Build Green CT events and educational offerings, as well as opportunities for professional development, education, and advancement, and opportunities to connect with industry and thought leaders throughout the state. I also just wanted to bring attention to an upcoming event that we're very excited about. The Bill Green CT Impact Awards will be hosted at the Glastonbury Boathouse in Glastonbury, Connecticut on May 20th, and we are very excited for that event. Yes, Maureen, thanks again for joining us today. Very excited to chat with you.
Sure, happy to be here.
Just a little more background here. Maureen has spent more than 2 decades at Stephen Winter, encouraging developers, designers, and builders to think holistically and build meticulously. Maureen, would you say that's a pretty accurate summary of your current role, or would you mind going into greater detail about what your
Well, that's
role
the
as managing
that's the
director
high
is?
level. Yeah, sure. That's the high level. Um, so I am currently overseeing a team of about 24 within Stephen Winter Associates, and we are the team that is focused on primarily new construction or major renovations with a sustainability agenda. So the firm as a whole does a host of different things to make buildings better. Been in business for going on 54 years. Um, and those topics include energy efficiency, accessibility, and sustainability. And so I'm kind of housed within that sustainability side of the business, which of course includes some energy efficiency. But we're maybe a little bit more generalists in that we're looking at topics kind of across the board. Do a whole lot of LEED certification, also things like Energy Star, some Passive House, National Green Building Standard, Enterprise Green Communities, and then just general um, integrated design planning and sustainability visioning and goal setting and helping folks, try to raise the bar when it comes to their green building goals.
Fantastic. Yeah, I know as someone who's been in the industry, sustainable buildings for around 10 years now, Stephen Winter has always been a giant and someone who's really helped the industry as a whole. I'm curious how you got to that point, though. I saw that you're a University of Wisconsin alum. Is that right?
I am, yes. I'm from the Midwest originally, grew up in Minnesota, went to school in Wisconsin. While I was there, I thought I wanted to be a mechanical engineer originally. But then you figure out what's really what as you're kind of exploring things. I ended up in the civil engineering department and specifically the construction management field, which is a really strong program at University of Wisconsin-Madison. But I had sort of determined through some internships and other things that I wasn't that interested in design, but I really liked the sort of like boots on the ground of getting things built and troubleshooting all of the real time, I guess, challenges that you encounter in the field. So that was intriguing to me. But I was also starting to hear about, this was in the 90s, by the way. I was also starting to hear about this thing called green building. And I was writing my research papers on studies that, David Gottfried and Judith Hiregen were doing. And so I was minoring in environmental studies, trying to sort of like combine those two topics a little bit through my personal interests. Um, and when I graduated, I ultimately got my master's degree right after. But when I finished that, I worked for a brief time for an entity called Madison Environmental Group that did sort of more general sustainability consulting. Um, and they had purchased a building and wanted somebody to help them do a green renovation. So that was my first gig out of college, very much learning as I went, not having much of an idea what I was doing. But they were very patient and, willing to help me learn. And since then, actually, a really substantial part of their business has turned out to be green building consulting. So it was cool that they had that backstory to sort of back them up. Um, but after that, I was looking around to see where I could actually go and learn from people who were really doing green building. And there was about three choices in the country that I knew of or that I could find at that time. And Stephen Winter Associates was one of them. And it so happened that I'd had a professor who had done some research on, I think, like a NASA project or something with a former Stephen Winter Associates employee. So that was how I got connected. Came out for an informational interview. They didn't hire me. There wasn't an opening. Ran into someone from Stephen Winter at a conference about a year later. And then they said, we could use somebody like you. And then I did interview and actually got the job. So I started in January of 2005 with the firm.
And you came on as managing director, is that right?
Yeah, exactly. They said, yes, you 26-year-old should be in
Yeah.
charge of. I did not come on as managing director, and
Okay.
I came on to support the residential research. That was kind of the biggest part of their residential service offerings at that time. This just slightly predated, really, residential green building certification programs. LEED was still fairly new in its development, but it was primarily limited to, the commercial rating system at that time.
Hmm.
And so I was doing different kinds of research for HUD's Partnership for Advancing Technology in Housing. I was researching like panelized building systems and hurricane resistant construction and all sorts of different things. Building science, really. But then also, one of my main tasks was sort of like, I guess you'd call it technology transfer. It was trying to write up reports that were less dense and more user friendly on some of the stuff that we were coming out with, which is maybe not something that we have always excelled at. A lot of engineers struggle with the writing, but that's something that's always been kind of a passion of mine. So I was kind of in communications to a certain extent, also, and trying to, publicize the work we were doing and the things that we were finding out. So that's how I get going.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so critical. I feel like to be able to communicate those higher level engineering concepts, building science, etc., to the greater building community, designers, owners, that sort of thing. Just kind of curious to hear, you mentioned that the first job you were managing at Madison Environmental was a green build or a green renovation. What were the green efforts what did they look like at that time? What were the major
Yeah,
initiatives?
sure. Some of the things we were doing, this was a building built in the late 1800s. It was a brick building, attached on two sides. It was 4 stories, walk up. Um, and a beautiful building right on the Capitol Square in downtown Madison, Wisconsin. Um, and we were doing it was not a full gut renovation, although there was one floor that we were gutting. And so we were doing air sealing to our, kind of limited, I guess, knowledge and abilities. We had a lot of reclaimed materials. I was getting stuff from, Habitat Restore, and we were trying to save things from the building. And of course, low emitting, paints and sealants. And it was my first experience using the soy gel paint stripper. Like that was a good foray into that kind of thing. So I don't know that it would hold up that well in terms of the air sealing that we did against today's standards. I think that's one place where we were, not on par at all with where we are today.
No blower doors or
Otherwise,
anything?
what's that?
And no blower door tests at that time,
We did
or
not do blower door tests. No, I imagine, we did some, we tried, but I don't, looking back, it wasn't, yeah, would not cut the mustard today.
right? Yeah, it sounds like you were
Um,
already ahead of the game with the.
but as far as yeah, I think we did all right on some of the, local and reclaimed materials and things like that. Yeah, for sure.
That's great. Yeah, and what is something that you learned maybe at your brief time at Madison Environmental, or even in your early years at Stephen Winter, that you feel like really contributed to the career and the success that you've had today?
I think one of the things I notice with newer, like incoming staff at our firm is it takes a while to develop sometimes kind of that like kinship with the contractors. Um, And I think that's something that I learned in that initial role to sort of better understand, I don't know, the trials and tribulations and challenges that you face in construction, and to sort of get a better idea of where things fall short of your original design intent and expectations. The things that you encounter on site that are surprises, and you're like, oh no. And you can't get the material that you wanted, that you had so carefully selected, but the crew is there today and they're not going to be able to come back, you know, ever again or whatever it is. And so you move forward. And so sort of like a certain amount of flexibility, I guess, is something that I think that I learned there that I think has probably served me well. I mean, you have to have limits, points at which you say absolutely not and no further, but also understanding that like working with all members of the team is an important skill. And I think we very often serve that role as sustainability consultants, as kind of like translators and even a little bit of peacekeepers sometimes between various, entities to get as close as we can to our overall goals for the project and really keeping our eyes on the prize and not, I guess, going too far in one direction or another.
Right, trying to remain diplomatic.
Absolutely. There's a lot of diplomacy in this job.
I think that's some good advice right there. Was there maybe a defining moment or a project early on in your time at Stephen Winters that really made you feel like you were in the right place, in the right industry, and sort of solidified that commitment?
Hmm. Well, honestly, I think maybe one of the most a very defining moment was kind of happenstance. Um, and I suppose that's true for a lot of people that Stephen Winter was the co-chair of the Lead for Homes Development Committee, along with Ann Edminster. And he went on an extended vacation to Australia, which is where he's from. And I started sitting in on the meetings in his place because I was the new person and I had more time in my hands than anybody else in the firm, apparently. And then I sort of never left. And so I got very clued into the development and the pilot of Lead for Homes. And that sort of became my business unit within the firm. Now I work on both, residential green and commercial, but that really carried me through, the first 15 years with Stephen Winter Associates, and kind of helped me carve out my niche. So, yeah, the boss's vacation was really what ended up shaping my career to a significant degree.
Funny how that works. Do
Yeah.
you feel like specializing in something that is somewhat niche allowed you to excel? Is that something that you would advise for young professionals as well, perhaps? Or do you think it's maybe better to diversify your expertise as much as possible?
Well, I can tell you that employers love to hear about a niche interest so long as it matches their niche interest. In fact, I think we prefer it, right? You're looking for some sign of what a person really wants to do and what they'll really be excited about. I guess the advice I would give is to try a few niches to the extent that you can early on to find out what you do want. But I do believe that, specializing can be an advantage.
And specialization, something that you look for, that employers look for. What are some other things, like as you're involved in hiring or looking at bringing in new team members that you're looking for, and particularly maybe entry-level positions or young professionals?
Yeah, sure. Um, the way I look at sustainability is that we're trying to change the way that we do standard practices, right? Across the board in all of our industries. So from my point of view, in green building or sustainable design and construction, um, you need to come at it from a position of understanding design and construction. So, more so than sustainability, which we can teach pretty easily, we're looking for people who also understand, for better or worse, the conventional way of doing things, because that's the language that we want to speak. And so much of the basics and the underpinning is still there. So I think that's my probably main piece of advice is just to, be interested. If you're interested in green building, it should be because you're actually just deeply geeky about buildings, and that's something we tend to all have in common at Stephen Winter Associates. So I more so see sustainability as like a lens or a layer than as like on its own the an underpinning or a whole entity. Now, the fields are morphing, so certainly there are some roles that I think are purely general sustainability, but I don't see that so much around buildings. So I think we really need the technical expertise that is associated specifically with buildings.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like that's something I hear pretty frequently in talking to sustainable professionals is that particularly in the building industry, having that building knowledge, spending time on job sites with contractors, with carpenters, even as a designer or an architect, and really seeing how things come together. Um, Something that's lacking, I think, in the industry, at least that I notice this can be lacking. Um, Maybe what about challenges that you maybe faced in your career? Things that uh, you had to overcome and maybe lessons learned from those challenges?
Oh, sure. Um, in some ways, I think one of the things that was a challenge is, despite what I just said about needing to know about buildings, I had a background in buildings. I had studied buildings. I'd had a couple of conventional construction summer internships and things like that. But as a sustainability consultant, you're really coming in uh, trying to speak from a place of expertise, but you're still pretty inexperienced in the realm of buildings, and you're talking to contractors and designers who've been, in their role for, 10 or 20 or longer number of years. And so learning on the fly, both the specific, niche expertise that you're trying to convey and just again, like the basics, I think that was certainly a challenge, right? Like, and I found that being honest about what you know and don't know and approaching it from a place of, please teach me. I think people respond to much better, and generally, pretty warmly. Like, no, I want to learn what you have to say, right? At the same time, I'm going to try to, push on you a little bit to maybe rethink some things, in order to do them more sustainably. But, recognizing the deep knowledge that folks have and sort of taking as much of that as you can. I loved consulting because you gained expertise really quickly just because you touched so many more projects than you would perhaps if you were strictly in a construction management role, staying on one job for 3 to 5 years at a time, or a design role, same thing, staying on, one or two projects at a time. It was both a challenge and I think very much an advantage to be working on, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40 projects at any given time, through all of their stops and starts. So I would say that's one of the challenges is just like, gaining knowledge. Another challenge is keeping up. That's one I think I started feeling more around the 20-year mark in particular. It's like, oh my gosh, so much of that, knowledge and expertise that you're accruing, it goes out of style, just like the fashions. Um, Everything that we were telling people about, the benefits of condensing gas boilers, right? Like in circa 2012. Not anymore. Don't talk much about that at all. At least in our markets where electrification is, really our key focus. So, yeah, and the pace, I mean, everybody will say the pace of code changes, the pace of policy and regulatory, environments, the keeping up with the incentives that come and go and all of that. Yeah, it's that can definitely be a challenge. I think the key is again, dividing and conquering, letting go and admitting what you don't know, right? And making sure that it's very clear who is supposed to know, like within your own organization. So we have to sort of divvy up topics, so that we can all, stay current and make sure that we've got comprehensive sort of coverage for the firm as a whole, because it's honestly too much for an individual, I think, these days.
Totally. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think of all of the career advice and sort of guidance that we've discussed with the guests on this show in the career conversations. That's probably the thing I've heard the most is just being very aware of what you know and what you don't know and like seeking more information, asking questions. remaining humble and just trying to learn as much as you can from whoever you can. In terms of continuing education and some of the things that you mentioned are changing the industry, are there any emerging trends or technologies or policy shifts that are exciting you, particularly exciting for you right now?
I'm really excited for the data we're getting about electrified hot water. I think that's something that, heat pump water heating for larger systems is something that's been making me nervous for a few years now. Most of the early heat pump water heater stories we had to share were not good experiences that people had had, and it was mostly a list of, well, now we know not to do that. Um, so that's something I'm pretty excited about, and this is kind of like following the mandates, right? We've had gas bans in places, we've had um, policies, regulatory, mechanisms and financing mechanisms that have promoted electrification to some extent without us knowing exactly how we were going to do it. Certainly the air source heat pumps for space heating kind of led the way. And once we got that sort of, figured out somewhat reliably, I felt like the industry was off and running. But hot water's been, to my mind, kind of lagging behind. And I'm thinking in particular about applications like multifamily, where you have such a high percentage of the building's overall energy devoted to domestic hot water and figuring out how we can efficiently make that electrically speaking, not just purely relying on electric resistance, but relying on other systems. So that's something that I'm pretty excited about. And we're engaged in a couple of research projects with some results coming soon where, yeah, starting to see it done well so that we can actually say what to do and then it can work instead of just like, well, don't do that again.
Absolutely. And then maybe the flip side of that same question, but are there maybe barriers in the industry or things that you are thinking are or you feel are slowing progress, areas where there's maybe opportunity for young professionals to specialize or to begin their careers that are in particular um, maybe creating challenges for the industry as a whole?
I certainly wish that I were more um, curious, motivated, excited to sort of take on I don't know, if it's like regulatory policy and everything else, economic frameworks that would make gas and other fossil fuels cost what they really cost. I think that's where the big opportunity is. Um, and I'm woefully ill-equipped for that. So I have taken a cop out and said that that's not the place that I can be of greatest service to this industry. But that would be transformative. And by cost, what it really costs, I'm thinking, all of the environmental impacts and
Hmm.
the health impacts and things like that. I mean, we wouldn't have to talk anymore about, energy cost savings in the same, anything close to the same language that we are now, if we were really, pricing utilities differently.
Absolutely. Yeah. Pricing in those externalities, right? Carbon tax or whatever it is, just trying to level the playing field. It's
Exactly.
been a big conversation as long as I've been in the industry. But
Yeah.
you're supporting Bill Green, and I know policy is a big part of Alicia and Sarah are involved with particularly. So,
Yes.
all right, last question for me, and then I'll open up to see if Alicia and Sarah have any questions. But what's next for you right now? Any projects, goals, dreams on the horizon that you're especially excited about?
I do end up spending a lot of my time and energy trying to uh I guess train our team, make a comprehensive team, bring out the best in each of my team members, try to, develop them in multiple ways. So that's actually what I feel like I spend a lot of my time and energy on is like thinking about how we can best position people for success. So it turns out that I'm mostly a people person these days. But I definitely still get excited about particular projects. I got to attend a ribbon cutting and a really great one last week. Unfortunately, it wasn't in Connecticut, it was in New York. But it's a great affordable housing project called Linden Grove. And I was able to work with one of the development partners. It was developed by Gilbane Companies and the Blue Sea Development Company. And I've been working with Blue Sea for all of my time at Stephen Winter Associates. So that was kind of I don't know, fun to look back over the course of that history and see this project come to life. It was a modular project, so that was unusual. Um, and yeah, very deep green, deeply healthy, earned just about every certification we offer. So that was kind of a nice event to go to for sure to celebrate what they're doing. And what's really exciting is a lot of members of that same team are now have broken ground just last fall on another project in Brooklyn called the Brownsville Arts Center and Apartments, which is going to be a really cool landmark cultural center as well as affordable housing. So I'm pretty excited about that one. So yeah, I still get really pumped about the individual projects as well as the big picture stuff.
That's great. Yeah, it really seems like sustainability, green building is taking off in the affordable housing space, and that's really awesome to see. Sarah, Alicia, do you guys want to chime in with any questions here,
I have one.
please?
And actually, it's perfect sort of follow up from what you just talked about, which was sort of, how much you're a people person and you're really into like training people for success. And, just from what I know about Stephen Winter Associates and how it's grown, I'm curious, what are the different on ramps for people into like I know, again, your people power, right? Like what are the various on ramps at Stephen Winters for people who are entering or want to enter the field of sustainability consulting? What are the different maybe positions or departments or anything that you can share about what that looks like at Stephen Winter?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're structured into I guess there's sort of like what we consider the building services, and then separately our operations team. And to be honest, I'm always surprised how much our operations team, by which I mean, our HR and our IT and marketing and everybody else, actually comes to like comes to the company because they're excited about the mission and the green building part of it and really sort of embraces learning about it, even though they're in accounting. So that's kind of cool. I think that. So I guess maybe that's even one on ramp is to be like adjacent, I guess, just because you believe in the mission and they're excited about buildings, even if your expertise is in a different type of area. Um, the other departments that we have, one is focused on deeply on energy, mostly in new construction. And so that's the high performance building solutions team. Our passive house services are largely housed there, as well as our whole building energy modeling. So that's the kind of like most deep dive, technical energy analysis that we do. We've got our sustainable building services team. I also have a couple of folks who are working on codes and standards within my team. Then we have the building optimization, decarbonization team, and they are really focused on that sort of like the implementation, I guess you would say, of the technologies and also buildings after occupancy. So we've got commissioning housed there, energy auditing, large scale decarbonization studies. We also end up doing a fair amount of work on uh, energy tracking and working with utilities on energy reduction programs and things like that. Um, then we have our building enclosure services. So that's in some ways, I guess, maybe more of a traditional building science department, just really focused on like the moisture, keeping out the moisture and the wind and the cold and all of that. They end up also getting into sort of the forensic side of business and like the building science failures that can occur when an enclosure fails. They also do a lot of work in historic buildings, because there's a lot of challenges often with repurposing those buildings. And of course, like adaptive reuse and renovation is something we're very passionate about because, everybody says it, the greenest building is the one that's already there, right? So extending the useful life of those. So that's another department. And then the last is our accessibility services team. And so this isn't always maybe something people first think about in terms of, the connection to sustainability and green building, but now that we've expanded the definition of green building to very much include the human experience in buildings, it becomes kind of obvious the equity issues and everything else that are deeply related to access and people's experience of use and travel, through a building. So, and also, there's purely the material side of it. We spend an awful lot of wasted building materials and embodied carbon tearing stuff out because it's not appropriate for all users, right? So, and having to do things over again. So, yep, our accessibility division is sometimes where folks are coming from maybe more of I guess it's almost like a sociology type
Hmm.
of point of view. But as far as the, on-ramps, we've got folks from, wide variety of backgrounds. Many of them do have an educational background in, one of the sciences like mechanical engineering, or certainly architectural engineering is like an ideal candidacy for a lot
Hmm.
of our positions, a lot of our entry-level
Hmm.
positions. Um, so that's where a lot of folks come from. But other folks have completely, non-technical backgrounds, and they have gotten work experience somewhere else. It's something that they fell into, working with the HERS rater or something else.
Hmm.
And so they've made great additions to the team too. But again, that common thread is always, passion about buildings. We
Hmm.
very much love to run intern programs. We've got,
Hmm.
dozens of employees probably who have gone from intern to full time. So that's certainly a very welcome on ramp as well. And then we certainly have gotten folks who've come from, the traditional side of industry and decided they wanted to make that switch, right? From architectural designer to, sustainability consultant, for example. So that's another one of the pathways.
I have to say that was such an interesting overview of all the different things that Stephen Winter. I mean, I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, I think, and again, maybe it's a sign of how, I mean, the other thing that's amazing is just how long Stephen Winter has been. You recently had a milestone anniversary, the company. Uh, Remind me how many years?
We passed 50, and I think this year, I think it's May 2nd, should be 54. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, in that time, the company has really grown. And I don't think I've ever I have a much better understanding of everything that Stephen Winter does. And so thank you for that.
Sure.
I think also really interesting just the diversity and opportunity. You don't necessarily have to be an engineer and architect to be able to make an impact on the industry,
Yeah.
even in the sector of buildings, you know.
That is
Well, the one,
100% what I was gonna say too.
Ah, sorry, Sarah.
Make come on. No, it's I think that I mean, I can imagine people being intimidated by saying, well, I want to figure out how to make buildings work, but I don't have the mind of an engineer and not
hmm,
pursue that. But I mean, I love that you use the word adjacent so many times. I mean, there's so many ways to help that effort in a collaborative environment, which it sounds like Stephen Winters is. Um, it's great. I find it really encouraging for someone who
hmm,
may not have all the credentials they expect they need.
I agree. And the other thing is when you talked about one of your earlier roles, which you called yourself a technical translator, I was smiling because, one of the things I think Stephen Winter does an incredible job is educating people about building science or making it much more digestible. I mean, and some of it is just. I mean, I happened to just see a post on LinkedIn today, and I caught it. And I'm like, of course they're out. It was like one of those sort of like bite-sized nuggets about a project and one of the sustainable features. But you've done podcasts for sure, and you've done you do so much education, and I think when you were talking about the operations side, I was thinking, well, yeah, if you're somebody who's skilled at communications this you could potentially have a role at Stephen Winter, even though you're not an architectural engineer or somebody who's has that building science background. So I think that's really cool.
Well, two of the things that we do that I didn't, call out in my list of all the things that we do. And you know what? They're not the only two, and I'm sure somebody will remind me of the other ones that I missed. But two of the things we do are research and training. And I think for both of those, you're drawing on skill sets that are maybe not ones that, like we said, you normally think of in relation to buildings. Some of the building science research that we do, I mean, we've got folks that are doing data analysis that is like certainly way beyond what I can do as an engineer, right? I mean, it's like a very specialized skill set to like really analyze that much, and that type of data that quickly. So that's a whole other subset. And then, like you said, the translating of the results. I mean, and translating technical topics to adult audiences. We've had, and we've sought it out ourselves, like guidance on how to train for adult learning, right? Like, because I think that doesn't necessarily come naturally to all of us. We actually did a training for the whole company last summer on public speaking and had a public speaking expert come in and talk to everybody. It's something I'm very passionate about because I think, it gives you a lot of platform if you are able to communicate effectively. And we're still in the business of convincing, right? Like we're very much, still having to convince somebody somewhere along the line that it's worth the time and money to do things, what we consider the right way, right? So having those communication skills really does tie into that very much.
Back to the diplomacy that comes, it's inherent in the job as well.
Yes, yeah, diplomacy. I often tell new hires on my team that, a big part of our role is like cheerleading. I've used this analogy of, as particular to green building certification, I use an analogy to like hiring a personal trainer, right? Like people say, can I just build a green building? Why do I need to do certification? And my answer typically is like, well, we all know that we could, eat better and work out more too. But do you? Or put that another way, if you hired a personal chef and a personal trainer, would you see better results? And that's essentially what you're doing when you're adhering to a certification framework is you are having enforcement of those goals, everything that you said you were going to do on, January 1st or whatever it was as part of your New Year's resolutions. Um, and so, along with that, I think a big part of what, a personal trainer might do is like cheer you on and encourage and, browbeat lightly, right? But also, there's a lot of cheerleading that I think we do with our project teams just to keep folks motivated and focused on those things that otherwise it's all too easy to lose track of in the stress of the budget and the schedule.
Definitely, yeah. I'd say it comes back to, or just narrows down to accountability, even just making sure that there's someone there to make sure you're doing what you said you would do,
Yeah,
and to
yeah,
cheer you on along the way as well.
right.
Great. Well, it is 5:40 now, so I don't want to keep you too long, but thanks again for making the time to join us. Will we see you next month at Passive House Network conference?
I will not be there, but multiple other folks from my firm will be, so be sure to look for them there. And yeah, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to get to interact with you guys and to, talk a little bit about the firm. And I mean, we are very much always looking for talent, so we certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk to your viewers and your listeners out there about what the firm does and, see whether folks might be interested.
Very much our pleasure, and I think there's a lot for the emerging professionals and students that will go on to watch this interview to learn from. So, thanks for
Yeah,
that.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Take
your
care.
time. It's really nice to meet you.
Yes, likewise.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye bye.